This is the voice of the Report of the Week, signing on. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone listening. This is VORW Radio International, the voice of the Report of the Week. It is Thursday, the 31st of January, 2019. You also may be listening to this broadcast on Friday, the 1st of February, Saturday, the 2nd of February, or Sunday, the 3rd of February, 2019. VORW Radio International is a weekly light entertainment program, which features a mixture of my talk and commentary as well as listener-requested music. To skip the introductions, this first hour very likely is going out on SoundCloud, perhaps a few select shortwave broadcasts. Sit back, relax, stay tuned, and enjoy the program. So before we get on to today's lecture, and I guarantee you it's going to be a good one, I would like to just give a few thanks to our advertisers. This broadcast is brought to you by Database Pros for HR databases, HOA databases, and more great database software. Visit db-pros.com. Their HR database software is great for employee and workforce management for all growing businesses. Check them out at db-pros.com. Likewise, this broadcast is sponsored by Brandon M. Lohman of Lohman Law PLLC. Mr. Lohman provides professional, competent, dedicated, and courteous service. He has represented clients in matters of personal injury, tribal law, oil and gas law, and criminal defense. Mr. Lohman is licensed in the state of North Dakota, the state of Minnesota, Fort Berthold District Court, Standing Rock Tribal Court, the Federal District Court of North Dakota, and the Federal Court of Claims in Washington, D.C. Lohman Law PLLC is based in Grand Forks, North Dakota. If you need help with your legal claim, contact Lohman Law PLLC to set up a free consultation. You may find them at lohmanlawfirm.com. That's LOMMENLAWFIRM.com. You may find them on Facebook at facebook.com/LomanLaw, via phone at area code 701-213-5986, or you may email them at lohmanlaw@gmail.com. With that said, stay tuned. I promised you a good lecture, and it's coming up. Enjoy some talk on VORW. And welcome, dear listeners, welcome one and all to this next lecture. A nighttime lecture at that. As you may very evidently hear, I am indeed outdoors, and the temperature is bearable. The temperature is not as warm as I would ideally prefer for it to be. I haven't a thermometer on me, but I would wager that the temperature is probably in the low 50s. The high humidity here in Florida, of course, makes that feel a bit cooler, but I will certainly take this temperature over some of the frigid Arctic air further north. So I'll take it. You know, I'm just going with a cardigan sweater over my usual shirt and tie ensemble. So I'm keeping warm, but I enjoy stepping outside and, just getting some of that fresh air. It all depends. Sometimes if the inclemency of the weather is simply too severe, I'll just stay indoors. But if I'm feeling it, number one, and if the weather is nice enough, then I'll step outside and lecture for a while. Especially at night, that's always the best, because I like the darkness. I do like the absence of noise and all of that stimuli, and it's just enjoyable. I'm a night owl, as they say. So anyway, we have three topics that I want to bring up. 3 listener-submitted topics, I should say, and a few points on my own that I want to raise as well. So I hope you can bear with me, and hope you enjoyed the show. So first and foremost, it's interesting how it is. 2 weeks ago, I did a broadcast. Maybe you tuned into it, maybe you didn't, and really at this point, whether you did or didn't, it doesn't matter. It's not what I'm trying to get to. I did a broadcast where I gave a lecture on the subject of making difficult decisions. And the show was what it was. I had some comments, some interjections, and there were 2 written pieces that I thought really summarized what I felt on the matter better than I ever could have expressed it in my own words. And sometimes you'll get that, where you have a viewpoint on one thing or another, and sometimes you just can't find those right adjectives and words to summarize your stance. And you'll come across another work that it says everything that you were thinking far more clearly and eloquently than you ever could. And, that was one of those times. Credit was given where it was due. It was written by 2 wonderful journalists, and that was that. Well, anyway, the show went out, and a good variety of feedback came in, and it served as a reminder of something as a creator I would like to offer to all of you. This doesn't apply only in the field of producing something or creating something. Rather, it is something that applies just to life itself. And it's something that should always be taken into account when it comes down to decision making. I'm not going to say that this is a continuation on that lecture with decision making, but this is just something that you need to keep in mind. Whether it be on a broad scale, be that if you do a YouTube channel or a podcast or a radio show, whether you are showcasing something to a large number of people, a small number of people, whether you are making personal decisions on behalf of a group of individuals, whether it be the choices we make in life. And you can hear a little nighttime bird there in the background for added dramatic effect. You can't please everybody. And you need to understand that and accept it as a fact of life. It is absolutely impossible to please everybody. You cannot. You never will be able to. And sometimes that's something that I have to remind myself. Because as a creator, I like helping people. I like trying to, just do what I can to assist others. But sometimes what comes about as being helpful to one person serves as an annoyance to someone else. Or what served perhaps as wonderful advice to one person wasn't good enough for the next. And it needs to be remembered that you cannot please everybody. I mean, let's face it, let's give a very generalized example. You can take something so absurdly ridiculous that it would seem at first that it would make everyone happy. Let us say that somehow, right, this is a very hypothetical example, but I feel it to be a valid one. So let us say, for instance, that I had the ability to give every single person listening to this broadcast $10,000 each. Right? No questions asked. You get $10,000. Wow, you know, that. How could someone not be happy with that? Well, you might have a large majority of people in this example that would be fine with that offer. But then you'd get someone that'd say, shame on you. If you had the ability to give everyone listening $10,000, why can't you make it 20? Why can't I have 20? And they won't be satisfied. No matter what it is that you do, how you do it, why, where, whatever it is that you do, always remember that you cannot please everyone, and while, especially on smaller levels, especially if it's just a personal decision or if it's impacting one person or the next, of course you can have all parties to be pleased. But if it is on, especially a very broad scale, be that with a group, a team, an audience, always bear in mind that you can't please everybody, and that's okay. That was one of the things that I learned very early as a creator online. When I was producing content, I remember I valued feedback a little too much. Meaning that, of course, suggestions were taken, and I would try to act on them, to the point where you would end up contradicting yourself. Because one person was upset with this, and they would rather see you do this. So you do that. And then someone else complains and say, no, I don't like what you're doing now, go back to this. And it just leaves you running around in circles, aimlessly, endlessly doing not very much. It's your life, it's your decisions to make, and you can't please everyone. So don't let those naysayers run your life and make you be something that you aren't, and do something that you normally wouldn't do just to please one or two people. Forget about that. That, of course, is going with the assumption that all of us are good people. That's what I always strive for everyone to be anyway, at least a decent human being. You don't have to be a saint or anything to that extent, but at least treat others with kindness, dignity, and respect. But make sure you stand up for yourself as well. And that, of course, comes from the prospect of making the decisions, being the one that ends up calling the shots. But if you are the subject of a decision, understand, of course, right, we can't please everyone. That's okay. And it is also your right to express disagreement, should you have any, with a decision. Does not necessarily guarantee that the person who makes the decision will act upon it, but it always is good to let your thoughts be known. That's why, for instance, with this broadcast, I accept and welcome feedback of all shapes and sizes. Be that a simple reception report, a music request, a shout out, or if you have anything negative to say, alright, that's fine too. That's fine by me. Though normally, it's always funny when I check the YouTube, and that's where most of the negative, the negative feedback comes in. That has always baffled me, to be honest, just getting on a little tangent. I've just never understood where some of the, I don't know, just some of the meaningless hatred that I see online comes from. For instance, like, there is some that I do not agree with whatsoever, but I can understand where it comes from, right? When you look at political issues, especially in the United States, but it could be anywhere, you don't necessarily agree with one side or the other, but sometimes you can see where their frustration comes from, even if you don't support it or endorse it or whatever. But then it's funny. When I do my online publications, which oftentimes are reviews, though they may be miscellaneous talks, sometimes similar to this radio show, though I really go all out in the miscellaneous realm on this program. Or they can sometimes be more comedy-type videos. Usually the humor is very dry, but I try to get a few laughs out of it anyway. I mean, you wouldn't believe it. The amount of... Oh, man. And the frequency that it happens every single day is astounding. It never fails to entertain at this point, because that's all that it can do. Because if I took it seriously, I wouldn't be here anymore. The amount of vitriol that gets sent my way on a daily basis over such a trivial thing, really, is always astounding. Where just because I happen to talk a certain way, or act or appear a certain way, you can think of any possible vulgar combination, and I could almost guarantee you that someone has called me that at some point or another. Any sort of threat, any sort of insult, you name it, gets thrown at me dozens of times, each and every single day. Why? I suppose just because. That's the one thing that always perplexes me, because never once have I ever seen a video on YouTube and have suddenly felt the urge to go ahead and type a comment or response to someone who I've never seen before except for this video, and berate them, insult them, let alone to the point of vulgarity or even wishing death or injury upon them. Never once have I felt that compulsion. Is that a normal thing? Is this what people do? I don't know. If it is, what a pitiful world we live in, is all I have to say there, if that is a normal action. If it isn't, then I suppose it is what it is. But, yeah, just take it with a grain of salt, anyway. You're listening to VORW Radio International, the voice of the Report of the Week. We are in the midst of a miscellaneous lecture, where I pretty much am out of my own original material, so we're going to be getting to your listener-submitted topics. We have 3 of them lined up as of now. Maybe more will end up coming in. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, you can send them in via email to vorwinfo@gmail.com. That's vorwinfo@gmail.com. Likewise, if you are listening in via the Shortwave, or TuneIn, or SoundCloud, send me a reception report. Let me know how the signal's coming in, what frequency you're tuned in on. Send me an email, vorwinfo@gmail.com. With that, I wrote down the topics that I wanted to talk about on a sheet of paper. I have it in my pocket here. Let's open it up and see what we have. Folded it over one more time than I anticipated. So the first topic suggestion is a quick one, but it is I think it's it's something that I think some people will wonder. It comes from Joshua, listening in from Texas, on Shortwave, and he was tuned in on 7780 kilohertz. And the question that he had was in regards to Shortwave. He wanted to know, he said, to give a little bit of context, he had an old shortwave radio from 1988. And I suppose back then maybe he listened to, shortwave radio. And obviously I think this applies to many people. As technology changes and as the times change, maybe put the radio down, put it away for a while, and, didn't listen. But recently he's broken it out again and has been, scanning around and trying to listen to my broadcast over the airwaves. And he was expressing some difficulties in receiving the program, and he wanted to know, essentially, since the 80s, what happened? It seemed like there was so much more to listen to, and maybe stations are so much easier to receive. And he was saying, what happened since then? Well, to give a brief answer to your question, what happened was two things. Obviously, since the 1980s, the number of people that listen to shortwave radio has declined substantially, and the number of stations broadcasting on shortwave has declined as well. However, that doesn't mean that it's dead. Sometimes people will go ahead and they will make the assertion that shortwave radio is a dead medium and that there's nothing on it, but I say this now from having broadcast on shortwave for 4 years. Over 4 years now. I started this show in early 2015, and with every single broadcast that I've done, I still hear from new people that tune in on shortwave. It's 4 years straight. Every show you hear from someone new. More than one person. There is still an audience out there, and the medium is far from dead. There are still plenty of stations on the air, and plenty of things to hear. When it comes down to your specific question, though, in regards to reception, the reason why some stations might seem more difficult, perhaps, to hear than they were years ago is not due to any differences in the transmitting power. As a matter of fact, all of my broadcasts, every single one, is transmitted with 100,000 watts. That's 100 kilowatts, which for a radio transmitter is a very good power. Because you can think of it that on the AM band in the United States, the strongest stations are 50,000 watts. And the transmitters I use are 100,000 watts, twice that power. And coverage remains widespread. These transmitters have the ability to reach from Florida all the way to Australia, New Zealand, India. The transmitter in Nashville, Tennessee has made it all the way over to the Middle East. Quite a long distance, but it still is possible. What has changed is the amount of interference on shortwave nowadays. And that, unfortunately, is just due to the advancements of technology elsewhere and, really lack of caring. radio interference comes from so many different sources, and I'm not talking about intentional. I'm talking about, man-made interference, right? Like if you live in the middle of a big city and you turn on the radio, you're probably going to hear buzzing and just loud static. You drive, miles out into the countryside, into an empty field, go out with the same radio, and you're going to hear nothing. It's going to be quiet, and the static is going to be very, very low. Interference comes from so many things. Practically every appliance usually can sprout some sort of radio interference. Power lines can do it, streetlights can do it, and it's a case-by-case basis. Here in Florida, one of the things, because I myself am very active with shortwave listening. I have the radio on this table next to my bed there, and I listen to it, every single day, the shortwave. So of course, I'm very familiar with interference, and there was this one, whatever it was, I guess it was a power strip, that when it was turned on, it would be contributing to some static interference. When I turn it off, interference goes away. And then the biggest culprit in regards to shortwave interference as of late has been whenever charging a cell phone. Whenever it's charging, boom, the amount of static generated from that is incredible. And then you just plug it out of the charger, goes away, and you can listen to anything you want, pretty much. So, the things that contribute to interference could be anything. And unfortunately, that's only growing. But if you are adamant, and you feel that it's something that you can control, sometimes you'll get people who are very serious with their shortwave listening, and they will go to the extent that if they have interference on their radio that's impeding their listening, they will go to the main breaker of their house, shut the power off, just to determine whether the interference is coming from their own appliances or whether it's from something outside their control. So it can be anything. But there's all different means. It can be trial and error, shutting off one thing, shutting off something else, seeing what works. Of course, going outside is always the best way to reduce interference, or having an antenna. Even could just be a wire antenna strung outside or nearest to the window. That will certainly help. And there are ways to try to combat the interference, but I can assure you that the broadcasts are all transmitted with a sufficient power, and wishing you the best of luck. But it was a little sad, honestly, when I went back up to New York back in December, and I remember, in New York there, I remember the house there used to be so good for shortwave listening. I was always amazed at how little interference there was, believe it or not. You'd think in New York, kind of close to the city there would be tons, but there wasn't. And I could just sit the radio indoors, no special antenna needed, and I could listen to broadcasts beamed to Africa, and all of these broadcasts that weren't even supposed to reach North America, I was still able to pick up with relative ease because there was so little interference. And everything was fine until last year when I made another trip up there, and I noticed that in my absence, the town installed some new streetlights. And during the daytime, the reception was still fine, but as soon as it got dark, everything on the entire shortwave spectrum was completely wiped out. I mean, it sounded like it was a buzzsaw, just, grinding and And, I enjoy listening to the radio, and I could do almost none of that during the hours which I'm usually awake, which is oftentimes after dark. And that was sad, because I enjoy the radio listening, and have that taken away from you. You can't do anything about it, but it was disappointing nonetheless. If you're tuned in just now, this is VORW Radio International, the voice of the Report of the Week. Your questions, comments, feedback, reception reports, or music requests later on in the show, we will be playing some music, are all welcome. You can email me vorwinfo@gmail.com. That's vorwinfo@gmail.com. There's never any sorts of spaces or anything. It's just the one long sequence. vorwinfo@gmail.com. And that's the way you can reach me. The reason why I emphasize the email so many times is because that is the only way that I know that anyone is listening to this broadcast. That's it. This second topic, let's see who it came from, was suggested by Austin in Arkansas. It's a shorter topic, but something he wanted to know my thoughts on. He said in 2019, of course, in the realm of music, you still have people that listen to records, that still listen to songs on vinyl. What are your thoughts on that? And to offer my response, I think that's fine. If anything, I think it's great. Listening to music in a certain form is completely inoffensive. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. It doesn't bother me one single bit. I'm not any sort of... I have no certain fanaticism with any sort of means of music. I'll listen to it digitally. But if people wish to listen to songs on a record player, that's completely fine by me. I think it's really neat to see that vinyl is still around. It still has people, while it may be more of a niche type of thing. It still has people that will use it and listen to music via that means. So I think that's really neat, and it's no surprise. You could make that exact same comparison with radio, where you can say, what do you think of the fact that there are still many tens of thousands of people in the U.S. alone that still listen to shortwave radio? Not satellite, not FM, not AM, not podcasts or online, but shortwave radio in 2019. What do you think of that? The same type of thing. The same thing, what do you think of people that still might use typewriters in 2019? I think that's fine. Not causing any harm. Nothing wrong with that. And people have the right to choose which way they would like to listen to their music or go about their media consumption or their writing. That's fine by me. And that reminds me, when I bring up the subject of typewriters, I had a typewriter up in New York. I never had the chance to get my hands on it again, but that reminds me, I do enjoy typewriters. Whenever I like to send out a formal letter via post, I always liked to write it on the typewriter. There's just something about it, something about pressing the keys on it and just that force behind each letter, the sound that it makes, and it's just a fascinating thing. And they still sell ink ribbons for the typewriters. You just have to understand that it may not necessarily be one size fits all. But I think it's a wonderful piece of technology that I'm still happy to see utilized. So, that's just my thoughts on it. I know some people may have may vehemently object to vinyl or any of that, and they say, well, the people that listen to vinyl are all pretentious bleepity bleeps. And that may very well be true, that some people that listen to music on vinyl are this or that. And it is also true that some people that listen to music as just digital MP3s are also this and that. And people that listen to it on cassette tapes are whatever. And, and that's just what they call cherry picking. Taking a few individuals who do one thing and trying to make everyone else look bad as a result of the actions from a small minority. You're listening to VORW Radio International, going out to you online via TuneIn Radio, SoundCloud, and international shortwave. Our third and final topic comes from a listener in Kentucky. His name is Cole, and he wanted to know what my thoughts were on luck. That's an interesting topic that you bring up. Luck, he said. What are your thoughts on it? Do you think it's real? Do you what do you think about it? And that's interesting. Sometimes I think that luck, the word luck anyway, can bring about, at least in my mind, some misconceptions. I think that everything is based on, on probability. And just because something may have a 4 in 5 chance of happening, there is still that chance, however slim it may be, that it will not happen. And if you allow something to go about its course a certain number of times, eventually that one desired outcome, however slim it may be, will eventually happen. If the conditions are right, it is possible for it to happen. I think luck does exist. Certainly exists. I think it irrefutably exists. But it all comes down to your definition of luck. How do you personally define luck? What do you consider luck to be? For instance, would you consider yourself lucky if you just decided to step outside during a thunderstorm and you didn't get struck by lightning? Did you get lucky, or was that just a stupid thing to do? Or to give another example, did you enter your numbers into the lottery and win the jackpot? Is that luck? There are so many different variances in what you can consider luck. But I think that it exists. In some cases, I think it is influenced, knowingly or otherwise, by our own actions. However, I do think that it sometimes can be influenced by powers outside of our control, be that simply the circumstances leading up to an event, which we had no way of influencing whatsoever. I think in this world we live in, there are so many things happening at the same time that certain situations will have certain outcomes that we expect, and then there will be certain situations that it'll seem as though we were doing everything right, and it didn't, just for one odd reason or another, just didn't turn out the way we expected, or it did better. That's being unlucky or being lucky. It always fascinates me, to think, when it comes down to luck or being unlucky, and the circumstances that we don't have in our control. I remember thinking once, and coming back to me again, sometimes you'll read about events in the news, or see a video, or hear about it, or whatever, where some sort of accident happened because someone just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It is fascinating. I remember reading about a week or two ago about an individual, I believe it was in Russia, though it could have been elsewhere, who died as, I believe he was just walking from the car just to, a high-rise building, and it just so happened that as he was walking to the building, some chunks of ice that were at the very top of the building just so happened to fall and, strike him in the head, and that it just happened to be in the spot where they fell, and he died. But to think, if you led up to the events going all the way back to the time, to the minute that he woke up on that day that he died, the time that it would take for that block of ice, say, to fall from the top of the building to the ground would maybe be 10 seconds at most, probably less than that. To think, even if he did everything the same during that day, but he decided in his car, before he went to the building, to just maybe spend an extra 10 seconds doing whatever, and looking at his phone, making sure his shoelaces were tied, or whatever. Then he gets out of the car, sees the block of ice fall. Whew, glad I missed that. He goes about his day. But it just so happened that didn't happen. He was walking right under it, fell, hit him, he's dead. So many things like that happen each and every day, and it fills me with amazement at just how incredible this world is. All of the factors outside of our control completely that just go into account day after day after day. And if you want to get really philosophical, you can just think, imagine if I just did things differently, even by a variance of a few seconds one day. Who's to say? I might not even be alive anymore if I did one simple thing differently that just brought about an entirely different course of action and led to some sort of tragic event happening. It's incredible, but I like to get caught up in thought. It's just how my mind is. But in the end, I suppose it's about the here and now, and we are all here in one piece. Hopefully, anyway. Hopefully you're in one piece when you started off the show, and you still are now. And with that, I'm done. I'm done talking. This is VORW Radio International, the voice of the Report of the Week. Like I said earlier, your questions, comments, feedback, reception reports, and music requests are welcome. VORWinfo@gmail.com. And with that, sit back, relax, enjoy some good music coming up on VORW.